to the Prophecy Club. I really would like to bring you good news. I would really like to say Donald Trump won the election, and of course we know that he really did, and that he has been inaugurated, and that he is our president, and he has started the roundup of some 1 million people that is cleaning our land and healing our land. I would like to be able to say all of that, but of course, as we know, that has not, and apparently now is not going to happen, because Purim, which is February 25th, is the day. It was. I would say it's the last day it could have happened. Purim is essentially Haman, the bad guy, was planning on hanging Mordecai the prophet in the noose, and instead, because of everybody fasting, no food, no water, this is all of the Jews in the area, no water, no food for 3 days, God gave them a great deliverance. And so the gallows that were hung for Prophet Mordecai, instead, Haman the bad guy was put on those gallows. Well, February 25th was Purim. And if there was going to be a turnaround, in my opinion, I think it would have happened on, about, or around February 25th. Since it didn't happen, and since looking at the other Coverstone Dreams now, I'm about to tell you some bad news. That is that no, there's not about to be a turnaround, and America is going to continue to slide down. I think we can forget the arrests. I think we can forget that Trump is going to come back anytime soon. I hate to say this. I don't want to believe it. I don't like it. But I've got to be the person that tells you the interpretation of what God is really saying. Now let's go to the interpretation. I didn't understand this at the time. 2:25, 4:45 a.m., I woke up and it was on my heart. I couldn't go back to sleep. What God spoke to my heart, what an audible voice, dream, vision, angel vision, none of that. It was simply in my heart. Okay, and that's the same thing that leads me to make the broadcast every day. I speak what He's put in my heart. So he says, because the church would not take the gospel to the world, I'm bringing the world to the church's doorstep. Because the church failed to take my gospel to the criminals, the lowly, the poor, the hurting, I will now bring the lowly, the poor, the hurting to your doorstep. You spent my money given to you to build my kingdom on living gloriously. Now your glory shall be taken and given to those to whom you refuse to give the gospel. Things like defund the police, removing the thin blue line, the thin line of protection from society, America's protection, and our society now will break down. Society will break down as criminals who we failed to win to Jesus are now coming after the gospel that was not preached. Because we didn't preach the gospel, now those criminals are coming back on us. And essentially, that's what he went on to say. I'm going to jump to a couple of dreams by Dana Coverstone. And I still stand, and I will continue to stand by this guy. I believe he is hearing from God. Again, I've had him in my home. I've been to lunch with him several times. We had him as speaker a couple of different times. I know Dana Coverstone, and I know his heart. And he's got a clean, pure heart, probably cleaner than anyone I know outside of maybe Leslie. God is speaking to him. And fortunately, when God really speaks, it's not always kind. It's not always nice and easy. I'll give you an example. Back when I first met Dimitri Duduman, he invited me to go to their 501c3 board meeting, and I went there, and this was like the second time I was around him. And at the time, I had no interest in being in the ministry. Did not think I would ever be in the ministry. And I was a guy in the world. We did some praise and worship. Well, that night I had a dream, and I was back in the praise and worship again. And in the praise and worship, Dimitri walked up to me with one of these legal pads, the yellow pads, and he says, I have a word from the Lord for you. And, of course, I was thinking, yay! But see, again, I didn't understand God at the time. I was about to get hit between the eyes. He said, this is what God says to you. In the kingdom of God, you think you're big, and you are small. Humble yourself and seek my face. Oh, man. I crawled out of bed, I got on my face, and I wept before the Lord. Because I knew it was true. I was just an arrogant, foolish young man that the God of the universe wanted to use in some big ways, and he had to make some changes. So when it's really God, you better understand He is not always kind and loving. I can assure you the closer you get to him, the more he hits. And that's the reason, like some guy the other day said from our pulpit, he was preaching, he says, well, I have a fear of God. It's a very healthy respect. I turned to Brandon sitting behind me. I said, it's not a healthy respect. I downright fear him. I'm afraid of him. So this comes to Dana Coverstone, January 1 through 4, 2021. He said, I saw two distinct flocks of birds flying above a 4-lane interstate with a median between. Now, every day I pray that God will give me the ability to understand dreams and visions. And this one is going to be a complicated one, but I'm going to make it simple for you. I'm going to tell you in advance that these flocks of birds are people, I believe, following people on the internet that they believe are leading them in the right direction. Many of them are New Agers following some New Ager, and I can name names if I wanted to, but I won't. Many of them are people that are not trying to walk with the Lord. They're not trying to hear from the Lord. Consequently, they are about to be smashed against the wall, and that's what it's going to say, for the first part anyway. Traffic was heavy, and at times bumper to bumper, but the speed of the vehicles was over the posted speed limit. The people in the opposite lane were driving even faster and more erratic. The drivers, both coming and going, seemed angry, with white-knuckle grips on the steering wheels and pounding the dash and screaming at other drivers. The birds were all crows and in two groups that appeared to have tens of thousands of birds in each group. I believe these are people that are following people on the internet that are in error. They are in error, and they are following people that are in error. They are not in the Word. They're not trying to hear from God, but they've got a whale of a following. They were headed in the same direction as the traffic in the right two lanes and appeared to be going towards a tunnel many miles ahead in the road. The flocks would bump into each other, and the few birds would fall and hit the ground hard and never get up or return to flight. In other words, some people walked away from some of those internet people. The two groups at times seemed to be intentionally flying into each other, and it caused damage to the birds in both groups at each time. In other words, some people on the internet don't agree with other people on the internet, and it causes some people to fall away from those internet people. Then off with the birds were flying seemed to be little flashes of lightning. And upon seeing this, a lead bird from each side would take off and lead about 50 to 100 birds off chasing the flashes. In other words, some guy comes up with some little thing and so grabs a bunch of people and they fly off into their own little YouTube channel. The lead bird was weaving and moving really quickly up and down and through the oncoming traffic. But each bird in the lead on either side also began to move dangerously, and the birds followed, seeming to be getting dizzy by following so quickly. And the turns, finally, each bird led the followers right into absolute danger. In other words, these internet sites are not trying to lead people to Jesus. They're not trying to lead people to the truth. They're trying to get a big following. They're trying to make a lot of money. And they're not interested in Jesus, Bible prophecy, or winning souls or building the kingdom. Fits perfectly, doesn't it? Finally, each lead bird led the followers right into absolute danger. One towards a semi, one towards the cement wall of an overpass. At the very last second, each bird suddenly flew up and out of danger, and the birds following were both hit by the semi and flew into the overpass, killing all of them at once. In other words, people that are leading people on the internet are going to destroy them. The lead birds then went back into flying flocks and began to do the same thing again and again and again, leading other birds from other groups to their deaths. The birds continued flying towards the tunnel that carried all 4 lanes of traffic. There were large American flags hanging over the tunnel above where the cars were coming and going. The flags were dirty and ragged and tattered and looked like they were connected through the strips of fabric that looked like candy cane stripes of red and white. The wind was blowing the flags, and they were rippled violently in the wind. The man that I've seen often, that's the angel, in the dreams appeared to be standing on the flags as they lay on cement embankment over the tunnel. He was wearing a metal medieval helmet, chainmail, and had a long sword the size of a Scottish claymore at his side. He was holding a large metal spike as tall as himself and a huge metal maul in his hand. Okay, what's a maul? When they take these two large pieces of wood that they have, or the tree that they have cut, you can't put that large piece of wood on the fire and get it to burn. So this maul is basically what looks kind of like a hatchet, except for some of them do, some of them do not have handles. But they're designed to be put on top of the wood, and then you hit the maul, and it splits the wood. It's a wood splitter, okay? So when it says maul, think it's a divider, okay? And this is what's happening to America right now. We are being divided. The maul appeared to change into an anvil on a wooden handle, and there was blood dripping from it and down the handle onto the man's hands. The traffic disappeared and the road became like a runway as both groups of birds merged together and took on the shape of a stealth bomber, speeding towards the tunnel. The tunnel was now much larger, and a dark hole was now filled with people wandering around with blind masks, possibly the virus mask, with blind masks over their face, and using the white cane that blind people use when they're on the streets. Probably talking about lost, uninformed people following orders given by the virus people. The birds are getting closer to the tunnel when the man placed the spike at a very middle ground above the tunnel and began driving the spike into the ground. In other words, these are the people that are bringing division. Now, we're not talking about government people. We're talking about the watchmen, the people that are doing the job of watchmen, and they are dividing people. The ground trembled and cracked open, and air rushed into the surface almost like screams. He pounded the spike until the tunnel began to collapse and ground was shaking uncontrollably to the point of beginning to split the earth. This is probably talking about an earthquake. There's a major earthquake, been prophesied for America now for many years. He took off his helmet and began pounding at a fever pace, and the ground shook more, and the ceiling tunnel began to collapse on the people. The people were unaware of the rocks falling on them and continued to meander aimlessly and just fell to the ground like they were dead after being hit by the rubble. In other words, our nation is falling apart, but most people can't seem to see it. They just continue to live their lives. The uninformed are in denial, and they go after their death, never understanding what's truly happening. The birds keep coming and entered the tunnel right as the tunnel collapsed on them, and they were crushed flat and buried under the rubble. In other words, many deaths on both sides, right and left, are probably about to happen. The flags were now burning and had burned to ash. In other words, nuclear bombs will hit America. Quote, she will be utterly burned by fire, Revelation 18 says. But you can see the residue of the flag ash being blown by the wind into the air. Out of the rubble came the man, and he carried the maul in his hands. In other words, this is the angel. And he placed the helmet back on his head. He placed the maul head down on the ground. And he said, now listen to this. Justice for all is coming, but will not be seen by the many who needed it desperately. Bracing is required to stay the course, but it will be a course of consequence. Now, let's back up and understand that's the whole point. That's the main thing we need to understand. Justice for all is coming. I used to want to believe that Trump was going to be the victor at this election and that he was going to round up these 222,450 sealed indictments. Now, apparently, is not going to happen. But the Lord is saying justice for all is coming. If Trump could have rounded up a bunch of these bad guys, then we could have cleaned our own house much easier and more efficiently than the Lord. Because when he comes in, he just splatters and kills just about everything. That's the way it's always been in the Bible. If Israel didn't clean up her act, and she generally didn't, then God generally just brought in and destroyed them all. There's a few times he used, like Samson and Gideon, but for the most part, he just destroyed them. Entire cities. Justice for all is coming. That is saying, America, you didn't pass the test. Yes, I know. We fasted. We prayed. We did everything we could do. We did everything we could do. But the problem is, Not enough fasted, not enough people prayed, not enough people were changed. I mean, we did not see the churches fill up in September and October. We didn't see a bunch of mass repenting all across the nation, except those people that heard and believed Dana Coverstone, which is, according to most people, a very small percentage of how many people call themselves by his name. So justice for all is coming. He's saying, America, I gave you a chance. I gave you a chance to avoid a lot of bad things, but you didn't do it. You didn't cross the line. You didn't make the field goal. So consequently, I'm going to do it. Not good. Justice for all is coming, but will not be seen by the many who needed it desperately. Oh, man. You mean the bad guys are going to escape again? I'll read it again. Justice for all is coming, but will not be seen by the many who needed it desperately. Sounds to me like the bad guys get away again. Bracing is required to stay the course, but it will be a course of consequence. Bracing is required to stay the course, meaning, I don't think it's just talking about physical preparations. I do think it's talking about physical preparations, but it's saying spiritually, we better get prepared. How are you going to get prepared? Well, I think one of the best ways is to get yourself to this Sevenfold Miracle Crusade, because that's one of the best things we're going to do. We're going to get you prepared physically. Water baptized, filled with the Holy Spirit, and lay hands on you. You will receive the revelation spirit. You're going to get some tools that are necessary. So you might, we could even call this the bracing crusade. Bracing is required to stay the course. In other words, if we don't want to get off course, if we don't want to lose our salvation, we can't lose our salvation. Well, you go read Ezekiel 3:20, because it says you can. If the righteous man turn from his righteousness, then all of his righteous works will be forgotten. Go read it. Yeah, you can lose your salvation. Bracing is required to stay the course, but it would be a course of consequence, meaning it's not going to be easy to stay with Jesus. From here on out, draw a line in the sand. Though Coverstone was a great blessing, tried to bring a lot of warning, not enough people listened. Then the ground began to shake, and men, none of which were soldiers, taking up arms and lining up ready to fight, the sound of reveille began in the background, and the men marched forward with intent in their eyes. There were shouts, and I awakened from the dream, meaning internal revolution. Some of the people start fighting against the government is about to arrive. I was wanting to believe that it was the bad guys complaining because a bunch of bad guys were rounded up because Trump won and he served those indictments. But now that the Equality Act has passed the House, and now is apparently, they're pretty confident, it's now going to pass the Senate. And of course, JB is going to sign it into law. That Equality Act is going to fulfill the burning of churches, chopping of the pulpits, and arresting of pastors. That is going to be the American solution we've been talking about. That is going to be the thing that is going to separate the men from the boys. It's going to separate the wheat from the chaff. It's going to separate those people that are really on fire for the Lord versus those people that are just playing games. Again, Dana Coverstone, February 18 to 20. This is his most recent dream. I saw a landscape of ice and snow. There was fog over the ground, so thick that you could not see through it. As it cleared, I saw the outline of southern coastal states of Texas to Florida, and I could see buildings that resembled churches in each of those states. There was smoke coming out of each of the churches, and there were many believers praying earnestly and loudly in each of them. They were repenting and confessing the sins of the nation, their own sins as well. There were many tears wailing for lost loved ones, wailing as their lost loved ones. This is saying there's about to be a bunch of people killed in America. There were many tears and wailing as their lost loved ones were being brought up in their prayers. They asked forgiveness for being an inadequate witness. That's what I was told. And for being anchored to sins that they knew were wrong. But they had kept holding onto the chain, and it ruined their walk with the Lord. In other words, we have too much sin in our life, it will ruin our walk. It will ruin our witness. He can't use us anymore. And as they prayed, I found myself above the earth looking down on those states. The louder they prayed and the more aggressive they prayed as they confessed, I saw that the snow was melting rapidly, starting from the church and working its way out. This happened in every state. As the snow disappeared, it left a gray mud that smelled of death and decay. There was very little green vegetation, no leaves on the trees, and the ground was dead and exposed. The believers went out of the churches and began holding their noses and asking God, oh, here it is, this is the answer to our question, did we pray enough? Holding their noses and asking God why he had not answered their prayers to bring restoration to the land. I'll read it again. Holding their noses, asking God why he had not answered their prayers to bring restoration to the land. In other words, all of our prayers did not fall to the ground, but there were not enough other prayers to lift them up to make the changes, so consequently the devil won. I'm saying the Moloch and the Baal worshippers won. I'm saying that the evil has won and the church has lost the victory, and now the evil is about to come after the church. That's what the prophecies say. Let's go on. The heavens opened, and the voice of God said, work with the mud you have been given. Some immediately complained and spoke of the hours that they had prayed, expecting to have a better return on their prayers. Once more the voice said, work with the mud you have been given. And the voice was firmer than before. A cloud appeared, and the believers began to follow it, but several walked away as they were heading directly over the muddiest and decayed ground, meaning there's about to be a storm. That's in the prophecies too. And it's going to be so bad that if we don't brace ourselves, I hope you're listening, if we don't brace ourselves, seriously, we can lose our salvation. We could find ourselves getting mad at God and walking away. Can't get mad at God. No. I didn't like the fact he would give me a healing. I had to go get a surgery, but I accepted it. This is saying, work with the mud you've been given. Sorry, I'm not going to give you the victory. You've got to go through some trouble, church. A cloud then appeared, and the believers began to follow it. But several walked away as it was heading directly over the muddiest and decayed ground. Those that walked away passed the churches, leaving their prayer guides and their Bibles behind, and said, we're just going to find ground where a God that will honor our prayers is. In other words, they walked away. The ones that did not follow the cloud soon were in the mud up to their knees and struggling to move, but gritted their teeth and pushed forward. Very suddenly, the howling of wolves was all around them. In other words, the Dems, the bad guys, are about to come to the church. And it's not just the church building. It's the church people anywhere and everywhere. The ones that did not follow the cloud were soon in the mud up to their knees, struggling to move as they gritted their teeth and pushed forward. Very suddenly, the howling of wolves was all around them, and the mud walkers stopped quickly to listen, but did not give in to their fears and kept going forward, following the cloud, meaning, as this trouble hits, I'll say it again, as this trouble hits, we can't stop, we can't quit, we have to keep battling, even though it looks like all is lost. And that's what it's about to look like. Here's another thing. If you think this sounds like judgment, has hit, then that's all the better reason for you to get to sevenfoldmiraclecrusades.com, get signed up. Because I told you, August 8, 2015, I heard the audible voice of God say, this is the time of miracles. As the judgment hits, so will my miracles. This, along with the Equality Act that they're apparently about to pass, is, in my opinion, going to be the judgment. That means we can look for sevenfold miracles, that Sevenfold Miracle Crusade. Let's go back. They would snarl and try to bite them, but are seemingly held back at the last minute. They were at times inches from their faces, but the people stayed focused on following the cloud and kept looking up as a group to see the cloud. The sky was clear, but the ground was muddy and ashen gray, and the sunlit sky revealed both the depth of the mud and the sweat of the people trudging through it. In other words, the thing that's coming is going to be tough. It's going to be difficult. Then the scene changed. I was seeing the entire United States in each group of the people who were all trudging through the mud towards the cloud in the very center of the nation, drawing the believers to what seemed like a central point. The cloud was not moving but stationary, but everyone pushing through the mud and avoiding the wolves along the way. But the closer they got to the cloud, the wolves began to make contact, leaving marks. Yet the people continued. The landscape was littered with the prints of the wolves, and they were innumerable, and their eyes began to glow with intensity like I'd seen in other dreams, bright red. They were being provoked by the winds as well as people wearing masks. These were the masks of skulls, witches' faces, and faces of demons. On the outside of the mud, these people were screaming curses and blasphemous words at the believers in the mud, calling them haters and dividers. There were no specific leaders as they moved along those in the mud, but some threw rocks and sticks that resembled arrows at the ones in the mud. The believers kept pushing towards the cloud. Though they were covered to their necks in mud, they were pulling some of the weaker ones along by hand, and a few were riding the backs of those that were stronger. The ones that had started in the mud remained in the mud, although most had looked at the more solid ground around them with some distress, meaning they thought about quitting. That's how difficult this is about to get. A few paused to consider getting out of the mud, and several did, helped by those wearing the masks. Once out of the mud, they were given masks and began to taunt those in the mud. They said, "The mud is not God's plan. He has deceived you, and yet you follow without thinking for yourselves." Then the Christ figure appeared in the white robe with angels all around him. He had a scepter in his right hand, and he spread his arms and spoke loudly. Listen carefully. "My ways are not your ways. Your spiritual legs will be strengthened through agony, and your witness will offend the naive and those who have no fear of me. Bracing gives way to fire, and those braced must remain on the path. My command is, come out from among them. Separate yourself as the chaff is about to burn, and their smoke will fill the skies." At this point, green lightning and multiple thunderclaps filled the sky for what seemed like a long moment. There were blinding flashes of light that lit the entire country up enough that even the shadows disappeared. The wolves hid their faces in the earth, and the people harassing the believers hid their faces in shame. Then the Christ figure was raised up in the sky. He thrust the scepter towards the earth and shouted, "I am coming soon, and my reward is with me. Stay faithful until I come." This is saying, my brothers and sisters, that all of our prayers did not hit the ground, but there weren't enough. And right now, there's about to be a storm hit the church, a shaking hit the church. And out of that, there's going to come great miracles and great salvations. A lot of babes are about to come into the kingdom. SevenfoldMiracleCrusades.com. More than ever, SevenfoldMiracleCrusades.com. Get signed up. SevenfoldMiracleCrusades.com. Lord, speak to the heart. Provide the ways and means to go in Jesus' name. SevenfoldMiracleCrusades.com. CornerstoneAssetMetals.com is owned by a prophecy student who reads his King James Bible and supports Prophecy Club. Call CornerstoneAssetMetals.com for gold, silver, palladium, rhodium bars, or coins. They can help you roll over your IRA, 401k, so tell CornerstoneAssetMetals.com Prophecy Club sent you. In my new book, Miss the Mark, I expose the 9 deceptions the beast will use to deceive, if it were possible, even the very elect. Since Lucifer is only given 3.5 years to rule the world, but given 6,000 years to prepare for it, is it possible he has set up a 9-point plan so well thought out, so cunning, will deceive all whose name is not written in the book of life? What would you do if you had to tell a person the most important thing in the world, but you knew they wouldn't believe you? What would you do? Would you tell them? I believe you would. But what is the most important thing in the world to tell a person? The answer is, don't take the mark of the beast, because those taking the mark do not get soul death, but eternal torment in hell. But how do you tell them? Give them Miss the Mark. It is designed to be given to anyone, even if they've never heard of the Bible, Jesus, even if they're in another religion. It takes them from a blank page to making sure they will never take the mark. It's thin and easy to read. 1 for $20, but don't do that. We offer them in shrink-wrap sets of 10. 1 for $20, 10 for $30, and 20 for $50 at prophecyclub.com. 1 for $20, but don't do that. 10 for $30, 20 for $50, give you extras to give to your friends.